my name is Cody Lennon, and today we will be talking about the environmental impacts of ecotourism and how that might affect the ecology in that area. So first off, we'll talk about some direct benefits of ecotourism. There are benefits and there are costs to ecotourism. So some of those benefits, direct benefits, might be that it would give incentive to protect natural environments. When people come and see these places, they start to see value in it. And with that value, they might see more incentive to start protecting. They might see other areas that maybe they may have more reason to actually develop areas so that they can support ecotourism. And it allows all these ecotourists to become watchdogs for those local environments. Other indirect benefits is that it does foster a bit of environmentalism, a bit of ownership in that environment for that community. And that can, on the side, produce other environmental benefits. With direct costs, on the other hand, as opposed to benefits, the issue here is that it's inevitable that any sort of tourism is going to have some sort of impact on that environment. For example, whether you like it or not, if you go hike on a trail, there is going to be some sort of impact. Large or small, your footprint is leaving a footprint, which is some sort of impact. Now that doesn't seem like a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but when 300 other people start walking behind you, that footprint becomes a trail, and that trail becomes a severe impact. And that just keeps building on itself and building on itself. Some indirect costs of ecotourism. As these ecotourism destinations become more and more popular, an issue might be that we see buildings start developing. More people are starting to come here, which means more infrastructure, which could lead to hotels being built, more restaurants, and a place that we were originally trying to keep more pristine and original to that environment. Next, we're going to talk about the different types of ecotourists. So there are hard ecotourists, there are soft ecotourists, and take a minute to think to yourself, what exactly is the difference to hard and soft ecotourists? Well, soft ecotourists are the tourists that might indulge in some of those creature comforts. For example, they might stay in a hotel, they might just go on day exhibits, where hard ecotourists might go deeper into that wilderness. They might actually go camping for multi-day expeditions, right? With each one, there is going to be different impacts and different benefits. So think for a minute, how can those impacts differ, and how might they balance each other out? So zoning is a way that we can regulate or mitigate some of these impacts that are happening. Zoning is regulations that demarcate specific areas and different types of land uses and the developmental standards to be applied within that land zone. So basically what that means is we can set certain pieces of land aside to be used for different things. For example, a climbing area may have a bird that starts nesting there. We can then zone that area off until that bird has done what it needs to do in that area, until climbing can return to that area. And so this can look a few different ways. It could be signage, it could be fenced off, but at the same time it's important that we determine what zones are able to support this. And that all comes down to whatever carrying capacity that environment has. So zones with higher carrying capacity might be able to support more soft ecotourists. Zones with lower carrying capacity, meaning that tourists will have a higher impact on that area, may be a better place for a hard tourism, some place that's looking to lower its impact. So site hardening, it refers to construction that is done to improve that site's carrying capacity. So With a pristine site, you're not going to see as much carrying capacity because it is pristine. Every time a person comes there, they are leaving a little bit of that impact, and it builds on itself and it builds on itself. So what we can do is we can build infrastructure. Might be as simple as building a bridge over a creek crossing for a mountain biker, or putting in toilets so that everybody's going to the bathroom in that same spot. That way we centralize that impact rather than disperse it and start eroding all these other parts of a trail. So here's an example of what this might look like for a hard ecotourist. So a hard ecotourist comes up to this site and he says, or they say, "This is a great place to camp. I'm going to set up my tent there." And they decide to sleep there for maybe a couple days. And then they leave a little bit of impact. You start to see trails forming there in the background. You start to see maybe a fire ring that has been built. Well, what happens when the next ecotourist comes? They see this spot and they say, "Hey, there's a fire ring here. This has been used a little bit. Now this would be a great campsite for me." And they stay there for a few days. The more they start to stay there, they start making it a more and more comfortable place to use this place. And they start bringing logs from around the area to use as benches. They start creating these user trails that are essentially creating more and more impact. And the more impact that happens, the more that people are starting to use this area. And you just start to see more and more impact in that area. And so this would be an example of like a natural hardening of that area. People are using it so much that it's getting impacted so much that eventually this site has the most carrying capacity as compared to what would be around that area. And so that's how that might look in a hard ecotourist version. And this has become now a designated campsite. Visitation is another way that we can mitigate some of these impacts. And a good way to look at this or compare how we can mitigate visitation would be quotas as compared to user fees. So basically what a quota is it is a set number of people that can enter an area on a certain day. So a good example of this would be the boundary waters. They have all these different access points, but only so many people can come into that area in a specific day. Some of these entry points will allow 5 people, some entry points will allow 20 people. But this is a way that they can control how many people are coming in so that that area doesn't get overpopulated. And that's a permit base. Another way to do it would be what we see a lot in our national park system, National Park Service, with user fees. As a tourist comes into the park, they have to pay money to get into the park, and that will control how many people are coming in, because it's not likely that somebody can pay this fee every single day, and it is a bit of a deterrent. For example, recently what we see in our National Park Service is during the very busy seasons of the National Park Service, just a few of our national parks are actually raising the price to, I believe, $75 a day. With that, it's not accessible to every single person, right? Not every person can pay $75 to enter this park. That will lower the people that are coming into the park, which will lower the impact to that park and mitigate how much impact is happening. So there are some advantages and disadvantages to both of those, right? With the user fees, the obvious disadvantage is that this could deter some of the people that we really need to be going there. It favors people with money. If you have money, you are able to go to this place. If you are somebody who doesn't come with that privilege, this might not be a resource that you can utilize and learn about our environment. It could also be socioculturally unavailable to that local community as well, who may live there to enjoy these things. Another likely impact would be impact to wildlife in an area. And what this will look like is there's wildlife living in the area, and a tourist might get a little bit too close. This can happen in a few ways. Sometimes a person might see a buffalo and it looks kind of cuddly, much like your dog at home. But it's not that cuddly. It's not meant to be pet. But they don't realize this and they go and actually pet that. That'd be a pretty extreme case. Another place this might happen would be a group of recreational climbers. Perhaps this area has been closed off because some birds nesting, they didn't realize this, they didn't know that the birds were nesting in that area, and they may have gotten too close to this nest, which would impact those birds in a negative manner. Maybe the mother wouldn't come back and protect these birds. So how do you mitigate that? If you have these different situations, you have two ways, which would be educating the people or disrupting the people in the act. And we can look at those and see that there are some challenges to each. Educating is the preferred way. If we can tell people why they should not do something before they do it, that's great. Now they have gone into a place with an understanding of how to behave in this area. The problem with that is it can be hard to educate these people. The next way would be if you saw somebody petting this buffalo, is you can go up and disrupt them in the act of it. The problem with this is if you disrupt them while they're already doing the act, they've already done the act and there's already damage been done. And so really what we find is a balance between the two, educating people and disrupting in the act and enforcing those. So some benefits of visitor education is that educating your visitors will be a way to increase your carrying capacity of that environment. As people understand how to behave in an environment and how to protect that environment, they lower their impact. With lower impact from each person, the carrying capacity increases, right? With that, that'll also create some social pressure. With more people preserving their environment and understanding what they're supposed to do, not to litter, not to walk off trail, not to go jump in the lake that is actually a bird sanctuary, that will deter other people from doing that. That'll encourage other people to stop other people from doing things that might impact that area. Next would be persuasion. Persuasion comes in 4 stages. First, it's exposure. So that means they've put signage up for visitors to read, or they have said something. Well, that exposure is great, but it all depends on how people absorb and receive those things. And so absorption means that they have seen the sign and they have read the sign. Once they have read the sign, they now need to interpret and integrate that sign. So depending on how they've interpreted that sign, they need to then integrate how they're acting. The problem with this is a poorly worded sign could convince somebody or not to actually participate in the rules you're trying to implement. After they have seen your sign, they have received your sign, and they have interpreted your sign, now they can make an action, and that'll tell you exactly how they are going to act in that environment. Now, the problem with this is that exposure. So with exposure, taking from our friends in the marketing department, we know that a billboard, for example, when you're driving down the interstate, it actually takes 6 times before you have to see that billboard 6 times before it starts to actually click in your head. And we know this from research. So with that, how does that look in our natural environments? When we put the signage up, does it take 6 times, or does it take 2 times or 1 time to actually look and read those signs to really understand what's happening in that environment? So a really great example of mitigating some of the impacts of wildlife happened in New Zealand as compared to what was happening in Australia with this penguin march. And so in Sandfly Bay in New Zealand, basically what was happening, 5,000 people a year were coming to this beach to watch these penguins come and nest. Well, basically what would happen as these penguins came to shore, they would see these huge crowds of people waiting for them at the shore. Well, a penguin trying to nest doesn't necessarily like these huge crowds of people. So they would stay at sea and they would go find somewhere else and not find their natural habitat that they were supposed to lie in. This is an issue, right? That's where they're supposed to go. This is how their species is supposed to act. When that human intervention deters that, that's where we need to step in. On another case, in Australia, they had something very similar. They had these penguins that were coming to shore, they were nesting, and it was also creating huge crowds of people. Well, the difference here is that they started to build infrastructure. They started to build seating for people so that they could watch from a distance. They started charging people so that, I think it was $17.50 a person, and over the course of a season, they would get 20,000 visitors into this area. So they were creating revenue, they were controlling where people were, and they were minimizing that impact that people were having on the wildlife, so that the penguins would feel comfortable actually using the beach like they were supposed to. So now you have this ethical dilemma. When do you control people, and when do you kind of let it happen on its own? So with that, keep in mind with your future ecotourism explorations, what can you do to protect your natural area, and what can you do to help other people understand these areas, and where can you move forward with that?